forgotten girl wounded, and alone found friendship in an unexpected place. The heat had been building for 11 days when the Veil chose water as their weapon. That was the thing about them nobody expected. Everyone, the generals, the analysts, the talking heads on every screen, had spent 2 years preparing for fire, for the orbital strikes they'd used on Ganymede Station, for the plasma cannons that had turned the western half of Auckland into black glass in 6 hours. When the Veil fleet settled into low orbit over the northern hemisphere, every military mind on Earth braced for the sky to open up in flame. Instead, the sky went quiet, and the taps ran dry. It started in the cities, one by one like candles being pinched out: Stockholm, Osaka, Nairobi, Sao Paulo. The water treatment infrastructure, every pipe junction, every pumping station, every purification node, went offline simultaneously, a cascade failure so perfectly synchronized that it could only have been engineered. The Veil had been here longer than anyone knew. They had been patient in the way that only a species without urgency could afford to be. They had mapped every artery that carried water through human civilization, and they had reached in quietly and closed every valve at once. The military had no doctrine for this. You can't shoot at a dry faucet. Marcus Hale drove a city utility truck on the day the tap stopped. He had driven one for 9 years, and in 9 years he had never once thought of himself as anything more than the man who came to your door when you hadn't paid your bill. He carried a laminated ID card and a wrench and a clipboard with names on it. He was not a soldier. He had never wanted to be one. He had been told when he was a boy that the quiet jobs were the honest ones, that a man who showed up every day and did the necessary and unglamorous work was holding the world together in ways that nobody ever photographed. His father had told him that. His father had also left when Marcus was 9, so the philosophy came with a certain asterisk. Marcus was 38, medium build, medium height, dark skin, weathered a little early from years in the sun. He had been separated from his wife Dana for 6 months, a separation that had not yet become a divorce, mostly because neither of them had the energy to complete the paperwork. Their son Eli was 7 and lived with Dana in her sister's house across the city. Marcus saw him every other Sunday when circumstances allowed, which they had not for the past 3. He was driving south on Meridian Avenue when his dashboard radio cut to static, and then to a voice telling him that all water supply infrastructure had gone offline nationwide. He pulled over. He sat with the engine running and the air conditioning pushing warm air at his face, and he listened to the voice repeat the same sentences in a loop. He looked at his clipboard. He had 6 stops left on his route, 6 families behind on their bills, 6 orders to shut off service if payment wasn't rendered. The instructions on the clipboard did not address alien interference. There was no protocol for this. He drove to the first address anyway, because he didn't know what else to do. The house on Delancey Street was the kind of house that had been slowly losing its fight with gravity for years. The paint had given up on the east-facing wall. The gate was held closed by a looped length of wire rather than a latch. The yard held 2 bicycles, a deflated basketball, and a piece of playground equipment that had rusted into a color somewhere between orange and brown. Marcus sat in the truck for a long moment. He could hear through the rolled-down window the high-frequency noise of what sounded like a television inside. A kid's show, something with music. He got out. He knocked. The girl who opened the door was maybe 10 years old, though she was small enough to be younger. She had dark hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, and she was wearing a t-shirt printed with a cartoon fish. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite indifference, something between the two, something that had been practiced until it felt natural. "Is your mom or dad home?" Marcus said. The girl looked at him, then she looked past him at the truck, then back at him. "It's just us," she said. "Who's us?" "Me and my sister." Marcus looked at the clipboard. The account was listed under a woman's name, Reina Flores, with a balance 6 months in arrears. 3 months ago there had been a note added, secondary contact unreachable. 1 month ago, second notice posted. 3 weeks ago, final notice. He looked at the girl. She had not moved from the doorway. How old's your sister? 6. Where's your mom? The girl's expression did not change. She had clearly been asked this question before and had an answer ready. The way you learn to answer questions when you've been asked them too many times, and the answer never changes anything. She's working, the girl said. Marcus looked at the clipboard again, though there was nothing new on it to look at. He had a procedure. The procedure was clear. He had shut off water to 47 homes this month alone, and every time there was a reason the family was behind, and every time that reason was someone else's problem. Social services, the county, the landlord, and every time Marcus wrote it up and moved on and did not think about it because the job required a certain not thinking about it to remain possible. He looked at the girl. What's your name? A pause. Nadia. Nadia, okay. He clicked his pen, unclicked it. Your mom know there's a shut-off notice. There's been lots of notices. Yeah. He put the clipboard under his arm. Nadia, I'm going to have to ask you to step back from the door while I access the meter at the side of the house. That's the rule. I just need you to. The water's already off, Nadia said. Marcus stopped. Not by us, she said. It stopped this morning. Everything stopped. She looked at him very directly, with the particular honesty of children who have learned that dissembling is expensive and honesty is free. The radio said it was the aliens, that they did something to all the water. Marcus let out a slow breath. Yeah, he said, that's right. So you can't turn it off, she said. It's already off. That's right. So you don't have to do anything. Marcus stood on the porch of this stranger's house in the beginning of what was going to become the worst summer in recorded human history, and looked at a 10-year-old girl who had clearly been managing most of her own affairs for some time, and he thought about procedure, and he thought about the clipboard, and he thought about his son Eli, whom he had not seen in 3 Sundays, and he thought about his father, who had been a believer in quiet, honest work right up until the moment he wasn't. You got any water in the house? Marcus said. In bottles, jugs, anything stored? Nadia considered this. Some. How much? I don't know, some bottles in the fridge. The bathtub, we started filling the bathtub when we heard on the radio. It's maybe half full. Marcus did the calculation quickly, the same way he'd been trained to calculate water needs for emergency assessments. 2 people. A half-full standard tub plus some bottled water, maybe 60, 70 gallons total if they were careful. In the heat that was building outside, in a house with no central air based on the absence of an outdoor unit, in a summer that had not yet reached its peak, that was maybe 4 days if they were careful, less if it got hotter. It was going to get hotter. He stood there for another moment, and then he did something that was not on any clipboard. You got a pen inside, he said. Nadia disappeared and returned with a purple marker. Marcus took it and wrote his phone number on the back of his business card and held it out. You call that number if you run low, he said. Not the office number on the front, the one I just wrote. Nadia took the card. She looked at it. She looked at him. Why, she said. Marcus didn't have a clean answer for that. He had several answers, none of them clean. Because you're 10 years old and you're alone and the world just changed. Because I haven't been able to do anything for the past 6 months that felt like it mattered. Because my son has a face a little bit like yours, that same expression that means I've been handling things and I'm fine and please don't make me say otherwise. In case you need it, he said. He went back to the truck. He sat in it for a while without driving. The Veil had not announced themselves the way humanity had imagined. There was no transmission, no ultimatum, no speech from a hovering ship. What there was, 10 months ago was a single broadcast, a 63-second audio signal repeated on a frequency that cut across every communication band simultaneously. That translated, according to the best xenolinguists the governments of Earth could assemble in 3 weeks, to something approximately like, "We are completing our assessment. Please do not interfere with the assessment." Nobody knew what they were assessing. Nobody had interfered, mostly because nobody knew how. The Veil ships, 7 of them, long and dark and shaped vaguely like the seed pods of an ash tree, sat in their orbital positions and did nothing visible for 10 months, while governments ran threat scenarios and the public oscillated between panic and a strange, exhausted normalcy. The water shutdown was the end of the assessment phase. Everyone understood this without being told. Marcus understood it sitting in his truck on Delancey Street, the engine idling, the radio now cycling through emergency broadcasts telling people to conserve water, to locate their nearest distribution point, to stay calm. The distribution points had been military organized for 2 weeks in anticipation of something happening. The nearest one to this neighborhood was 4 miles away, at the old convention center on Fletcher Boulevard. 4 miles. For a 10-year-old girl and a 6-year-old, on foot, in 94-degree heat, through a city that was beginning to understand what it had lost. Marcus put the truck in gear. He did not drive to his next stop. His supervisor called him at 2 in the afternoon. "Where are you, Hale?" "South Side." "You've got 4 stops outstanding." "The water's off, Ron, everywhere. There's nothing to shut off." A pause on the line. Ron Belcher had been supervisor of the utility division for 16 years, and he had a voice that communicated, at all times, the deep personal cost of dealing with people who didn't understand how simple things were. "That doesn't change the fact that we have outstanding orders. I need documentation that you visited those addresses." "Ron." "What?" "There are kids in some of these houses. Alone, no water." "That's social services, Marcus. That's not our department." "Social services isn't answering their phones. I've been trying." "Then you document it and you move on. You're not responsible for." "I know what I'm not responsible for," Marcus said. "That's a very long list." He hung up. He called Dana. "Are you watching the news?" she said instead of hello. "I'm in it," Marcus said. "How much water do you have there?" "We filled everything we could when the broadcast started. The bathtub, every pot, Eli's wading pool. Maybe 2 days if we're careful." "I know where the nearest distribution point is. I can get you there in the truck. I've got about 100 gallons of emergency water in the back. It's supposed to be for system flushing, but right now it's not being used for anything." A pause. "Marcus." "I'm not trying to," he stopped, started again. "I'm just trying to help you and Eli, that's it." "Okay," Dana said quietly. "Okay, come over." He sat for a moment after he hung up. Through the windshield he could see the house on Delancey Street, which he had passed again while doing nothing in particular, just driving. The front door was closed. He could still see the faint light of the television through the curtain. He got out of the truck. He knocked again. When Nadia opened the door, he said, "Do you and your sister want to come with me for a while?" Nadia looked at him with those careful eyes. "Where?" "I'm going to pick up someone. Then I'm going to figure out where to get more water. You'd be back before dark." "You're not supposed to take kids places," Nadia said. "That's correct," Marcus said. "Do you want to come anyway?" Nadia went back inside without answering. He heard her voice, low and murmuring, and then a higher voice responding. Then footsteps. She came back with her sister, who was 6 and whose name, Marcus would learn, was Cora, and who was wearing a dress printed with yellow sunflowers and carrying, for reasons that were never explained, a single sneaker in one hand while her other foot was bare. "She lost the other one," Nadia said by way of explanation. "Where?" "We don't know. That's why she lost it." Cora looked up at Marcus with the absolute unself-consciousness of 6-year-olds everywhere, the complete absence of the calculation that Nadia had already learned. She held up the sneaker. "It doesn't fit anymore anyway," she said. "Okay," Marcus said, "get in the truck." He thought about it sometimes, what the Veil actually wanted. The military line, the one that got repeated on every broadcast, was that they were a hostile force conducting an invasion, and that human resistance was essential and ongoing. That last part was optimistic. What resistance there had been, the missile strikes, the 2 attempted boarding actions, the experimental electromagnetic pulse platforms that 3 nations had quietly launched, had accomplished nothing visible. The Veil ships sat in orbit like stones. But invasion was the wrong word for what they were doing. An invasion takes something. What the Veil were doing was more like, and Marcus had thought about this in the long, uncommitted hours of his truck, with the radio a low murmur and the city sliding past his windows. What they were doing was more like the way a man with all the power in a negotiation doesn't bother to raise his voice. They had simply removed something essential and sat back and waited to see what humanity would do. Marcus had been, for 9 years, the man sent to do the removing. He understood the Veil better than most. Eli was in the driveway when Marcus pulled up, bouncing a basketball against the cracked concrete with the absorbed concentration of 7-year-olds engaged in repetitive activities. He looked up when the truck stopped. His face did the thing it always did when he saw Marcus, a brightness that tried to stay controlled, because he had learned from watching his mother that enthusiasm was a vulnerability. Marcus got out, he crouched down. Eli came over and let himself be hugged for exactly 3 seconds before pulling back to the basketball. "There's girls in your truck," Eli said. "Yeah. Why?" "Because they needed to be somewhere." Eli considered this with the seriousness of someone for whom needs and logistics were a known language. "Are they thirsty?" "Probably." Eli went inside without further comment and came back with 3 juice boxes, which he delivered to the truck window with the gravity of a diplomat presenting credentials. Nadia took them without expression. Cora said thank you twice, the second time very quietly, as if checking to make sure the first one had landed. Dana came out of the house with a look that Marcus recognized. The look that meant she was processing several things simultaneously and had decided to let the most complicated one wait. She was carrying a duffel bag which she'd filled. Marcus could see through the partially open zipper, with bottles and containers of water. She looked at the truck, at the girls, at Marcus. "You picked up strays," she said. "Their mom's not home. They were alone." Dana was quiet for a moment. She had been a caseworker for the county for 4 years before she'd taken the teaching job, and Marcus had always thought she carried those 4 years around with her in a specific way, not as a burden but as a kind of secondary vision, the ability to look at a situation and see the structural failure beneath the surface detail. "How long have they been alone?" she said. "Don't know, more than a day, I think." Dana looked at the girls again, then at Marcus. She set the duffel bag in the truck bed without further comment. "I'll drive," she said. "You know where the distribution point is." "I know where everything is," Marcus said. "That's my job." "Was your job," Dana said, not unkindly. He thought about that as they drove, all 5 of them in the cab, Dana behind the wheel because Marcus had, in fact, offered, and she had simply taken it, which was also her way, Eli between them. The 2 girls pressed against the passenger window with Cora's sunflower dress vivid against the cracked vinyl. The city outside had a quality he'd never seen before. Not panic, not yet. Something quieter. The kind of stillness that settles over a place when a thing that everyone assumed was permanent turns out not to be. People stood in their doorways. Groups of neighbors that had never spoken stood on corners. A line had formed outside a hardware store where someone had apparently heard they were selling garden hoses. though where one put a garden hose when there was no water pressure remained unclear. The logic of crisis is its own logic. You do the nearest thing that looks like action. "Where's their mother?" Dana asked quietly, below the level of the children's hearing. "Working," Marcus said, the same word Nadia had used, with the same weight she had given it. Dana nodded once slowly. She understood. The distribution center at the convention center was not a catastrophe yet, but it had the structure of one. The National Guard had set up a water distribution system inside, and the line extended out through the main entrance and around the east side of the building. People had brought containers of every description, buckets, trash cans, stacked cases of empty bottles, a child's swimming pool being wheeled on a dolly. Marcus had his utility truck and 100 gallons of emergency water and a municipal ID. He went to the guard officer at the head of the line and spent 4 minutes in a conversation that mixed professionalism and stubbornness in roughly equal measure, and came out of it with permission to pull the truck around to the loading dock where they were doing bulk distribution for critical services. They took on 200 more gallons and secured the containers. He got back in the cab. Eli was asleep against Dana's shoulder with the sudden absolute collapse of small children who have processed too much. Cora was asleep too, her head against Nadia's arm, the recovered sneaker still somehow in her hand. Nadia was not asleep. She was watching Marcus with those careful, measuring eyes. "Are you going to call someone about us?" she said. "What do you mean?" "Social services, or whoever. Are you going to make a report and then someone comes and we get put somewhere?" Marcus looked at her. She had asked the question in a perfectly flat tone, the tone of someone describing a weather system, not asking for sympathy, not asking for intervention, just gathering data. "Is that what you're worried about?" "I'm not worried," Nadia said. "I just want to know what's going to happen." Marcus thought about what he knew about bureaucratic systems, which was considerable, and what he knew about their reliability in the current circumstances, which was increasingly nothing. The county systems were overwhelmed. The phone lines were jammed. The entire infrastructure of institutional response was straining against the same absence that was straining every other infrastructure. "I don't think anything's going to happen tonight," he said. "Tonight we're going to find somewhere to put this water where it's accessible and where it stays clean, and you and your sister are going to eat something and sleep somewhere safe. After that, I don't know. We figure it out." Nadia looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked out the window. "You can't fix it," she said. "What?" "You can't fix our situation. There's too much wrong with it for one person to fix. I know that." She kept looking out the window. "But you cannot make it worse tonight. That's still something." Marcus sat with that for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "that's still something." The Veil made their second move on day 3. What happened was not technically an attack. Everyone said this with some emphasis, as if the technicality mattered. What happened was a deployment of what military scientists later called atmospheric regulators, devices the size of a shipping container that descended from the Veil ships on the second night and distributed themselves across every major landmass in configurations that, when mapped, looked disconcertingly like they'd been planned to correspond with human population centers. The devices did nothing immediately visible. They hummed at a frequency below human hearing, detectable only as a vibration in the chest that some people dismissed as anxiety and others correctly identified as something outside their bodies. What they produced over the following 2 days was heat. Not solar heat, the sky remained clear, the sun unchanged. But the ambient temperature across every major city on Earth began to climb by 2 to 3 degrees each day, an atmospheric manipulation precise enough that rural areas were largely unaffected while urban heat islands became pressure cookers. Within a week, city temperatures reached levels where extended outdoor exposure became dangerous. Human logistical response, the trucks, the convoys, the National Guard operations, became progressively harder to maintain. Without water, without the ability to move through a hostile environment for extended periods, you took the humans off the board without a single weapon fired. It was, everyone agreed in retrospect, elegant. In the same way a drought is elegant, in the same way cruelty can be systematic and silent and precise. Marcus understood it because he had spent 9 years in the business of strategic resource withholding. He understood the Vale better than he wanted to. He moved into the Delancey Street house on day 4. It was not a decision so much as an accumulation of small choices, each of which individually was defensible and which together added up to something irreversible. He had driven Nadia and Cora home on the first night. He had come back the second morning with water from the reserves he'd been systematically caching, water from the truck, from a building supply store whose manager he knew, from a church 2 miles away, whose basement had been converted to a storage and distribution point by the congregation. He had brought food the second evening, grocery store canned goods from the shelf-stable section, which had sold out almost entirely within 36 hours of the shutdown, but which he had managed to access early through a combination of root knowledge and a certain willingness to be at specific places at very early hours. On the morning of day 4, he had brought Dana and Eli, because Dana had assessed her sister's house as untenable. The heat had made the upper floor uninhabitable, and the basement was already being shared with her sister's family and 2 neighbors from the adjoining townhouse. The Delancey Street house was a single story with good cross-ventilation and a basement that could serve as a shelter during the worst of the afternoon heat. He had not asked Nadia's permission to do any of this. He had simply shown up each time and done the next necessary thing, and Nadia had watched him do it with those eyes that were simultaneously the most suspicious and the most perceptive eyes he had encountered in recent memory. On day 4, when he arrived with Dana and Eli and 3 more containers of water, Nadia looked at the containers and then at Dana and then at Eli and then at him. "Are you staying?" she said. "For a while," Marcus said, "if that's okay." Nadia looked at Cora, who was standing behind her eating a piece of bread, and had apparently already decided her position on the matter, which appeared to be favorable. "There are rules," Nadia said. "Okay. Nobody goes in Mom's room. That's rule 1. Okay. The water in the bathtub is emergency water, and nobody uses it for anything that isn't an emergency." "Agreed." And she paused, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, something moved behind those careful eyes that wasn't calculation, something younger, something that had been held back for a long time by the effort of being 10 years old and responsible for everything. "And you don't leave without telling us you're leaving." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "I won't," he said. It was the most serious promise he had made in years, and both of them knew it. Dana organized the basement. She had a quality Marcus had always recognized and only sometimes appreciated, a kind of practical clarity that could assess any situation and produce a plan in roughly the time it took most people to understand what was happening. By the end of the first day, she had the basement mapped. Sleeping areas with bedrolls, a corner for the water supply organized by priority, a small camp stove and fuel for heating food, a battery-powered radio positioned at the base of the stairs where it could be heard from anywhere in the space. Eli attached himself to Cora with the immediate and unexamined loyalty that children that age extend to whoever is closest to their size. They were not playing so much as conducting a series of small investigations into the contents of the basement, into the backyard, into the nature of ants, into whether a bottle cap could be made to spin on the smooth concrete floor in a way that satisfied some internal criterion neither of them had articulated. Nadia watched all of this from a position near the stairs, where she had established herself as a kind of checkpoint, not hostile, not withdrawn, just present in the way that a person is present when they have decided to wait and see. Marcus found her there one evening, when the light had dropped and the heat outside had not. "What happened to your dad?" Nadia said without preamble. "He left," Marcus said. "How old were you?" 9. Nadia nodded slowly, as if this was data she was filing away. "Was it because of him or because of you?" "Him," Marcus said. 100% him." "That's what I tell Cora," Nadia said, "about ours, that it's nothing about us." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't always believe it." "You should," Marcus said. "I know I should. That's different from believing it." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "What was your dad like before he left?" "Quiet, good at his job. He used to tell me the quiet jobs were the honest ones." He paused. "I believed that for a long time." "Do you still?" Marcus thought about 9 years of clipboards and procedures, and the long list of things that were someone else's problem. He thought about 47 homes with water shut off, and the faces at 30 of those doors, and the way he had written the notes and moved on because the job required a certain not thinking about it. "I think it depends on what you do with the quiet," he said. Nadia considered this. Then she got up and went to check on Cora, which had become her regular hourly action, as reliable as a tide. On day 7, Marcus's colleague Ray found him. Ray Gutierrez had been Marcus's partner on the utility route for 3 years, compact, pragmatic, with a talent for fixing mechanical things, and a complete immunity to the weight of the work that Marcus had always privately found both admirable and troubling. He showed up at the Delancey Street house with a truck he'd loaded with supplies from the utility depot, which had apparently been abandoned by the management hierarchy without clear orders, leaving the lower-level employees to do what they thought best with the equipment. "Ron called the whole department in," Ray said, sitting at the kitchen table while Dana poured them both coffee from the last of a carefully hoarded supply. "Said the city needs us to do assessments, door to door, check on which residential areas still have stored water where the critical deficits are." "That makes sense," Marcus said. He also said we're to document any unauthorized resource hoarding and report it to the coordination center. Marcus looked at him. "He said some people are collecting more than their share," Ray said carefully, "and the coordination center needs to know." "Who decides what a share is?" "Ron, apparently." Marcus looked at his coffee. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I needed to locate my partner first." Ray looked around the kitchen, at the water containers stacked in organized rows, at the camping supplies, at the evidence of 5 people living in a careful and structured way that was clearly not accidental. He looked at Marcus. "I think what you're doing is probably the right thing." "I'm not sure it matters whether it's right." "No," Ray said. "It matters. It's just, you should know that people like Ron are going to become a problem. The coordination is fragmenting. The central authority is trying to reassert itself, but it doesn't know what to do any more than anyone else, so it's falling back on documentation and hierarchy, because that's the only thing it knows how to perform." "I know how that works," Marcus said. "I know you know." Ray drained his coffee. "I'm going to keep working. Real work, finding the deficits, helping move water to where it's needed, not documenting hoarders. You want to work with me on that?" "Yeah," Marcus said, "I do." He looked at Nadia, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway with the silent completeness she had, the way she could be elsewhere and then simply be present without the intermediate steps. "Are you going out?" she said. "In the mornings," Marcus said, "home by afternoon. Before the worst heat." Nadia looked at Ray. Ray looked back at her with uncomplicated directness. "I'll have him back," Ray said. "That's not," Nadia started, stopped. Something shifted in her face, quick and almost invisible, the movement of a feeling that had been held for too long. "Just tell me before you go, okay?" "Every time," Marcus said. They found the veiled device on day 9. Marcus and Ray had been running routes through the industrial district when Ray spotted it through the truck window, one of the atmospheric regulators, sitting in the empty lot behind a decommissioned warehouse like something left behind by a tide. Up close it was both more and less than its reputation. It was gray-black and roughly rectangular, covered in a surface texture that was not quite metal and not quite any other material Marcus could name. It was warm to the touch, significantly warmer than the ambient air, which, given the ambient air was already at 101 degrees, meant the device itself was putting out considerable heat. It hummed at the subaudible frequency he'd been feeling in his chest for 9 days. Ray circled it twice. He had a way with mechanical things. He approached them the way a person approaches a language they don't speak, by listening to it, pattern reading, looking for the logic beneath the unfamiliar surface. "It's got intake ports," Ray said. He pointed. 4 of them evenly spaced, near the base. "What does it take in?" "Can't tell. Could be atmospheric data, could be part of the heat exchange." He crouched down and looked at the ports closely without touching them. "The heat it's putting out, that's a byproduct. Whatever it's actually doing, this is the exhaust." Marcus looked at the device, and then at the sky where the Veil ships were invisible but known, and then at the heat-white city around them. He thought about water. He thought about dry pipes and dry taps and 9 years of strategic withholding, and the elegant cruelty of a system designed to make people helpless. He thought about the bathtub on Delancey Street, the emergency water, the rules. "If it's an exhaust port," Marcus said, "it can also be an intake port." Ray looked at him. "The device processes atmosphere," Marcus said. "It takes something in and it changes it and it outputs heat. If you reverse the intake, if you introduce something into the process that it's not designed to process, you'd need to know what you were introducing into it," Ray said carefully. "Water," Marcus said. "Liquid water under pressure, introduced directly into the intake ports." Ray was quiet for a long moment. "Water and heat exchange machinery don't coexist well," he said. "No," Marcus said, "they don't. You'd need pressure. These utility trucks have pressure systems." "I know how the trucks work," Marcus said. "I've driven one for 9 years." Ray stood up and looked at the device and then at Marcus, and then at the sky in the way people had learned to look at the sky, the habitual checking of a thing that had changed. "If it works," Ray said, "it'll be because it's a dumb solution to an elegant problem." "The dumbest solutions usually are," Marcus said. "That's why they work." Ray took out his phone and called 3 other utility workers he'd been in contact with. He told them to bring their trucks and every high-pressure hose they had, and to meet him at the warehouse lot in 2 hours. He didn't explain more than that. They came anyway, because Ray had a quality of uncomplicated reliability that people had learned in 9 days of crisis to orient toward. Marcus called Dana from the truck. "I'm going to be later than I said," he told her. "How late?" "I don't know. I'll call when I know more." A pause. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "Something dumb," he said. "That might work." "Is this going to get you killed?" "Probably not." Another pause. "Call me." "I will." He called the house on Delancey Street next, which was a thing he had never done before, and which felt significant in a way he couldn't entirely articulate. Nadia answered on the second ring. "I'm going to be late," he said. A silence, then, "Okay. I'll call before it gets dark." "I promise." "Okay," she said again, and this time the word had a weight to it, not just acknowledgement but something that had decided to trust a thing it had been withholding trust from, the way water builds behind a dam and eventually, one way or another, finds a way through. There were 5 trucks, 4 utility workers besides Marcus and Ray, all of them with the same air of people who had been performing a function for years without particularly examining its value, and who had, in the past 9 days, developed a new orientation toward what functions were worth performing. They connected the pressure hoses in a series configuration, running the flow from all 5 trucks into a single high-pressure line that Ray had assembled from spare fittings from the warehouse. The total pressure was enough to push water at a rate Marcus calculated, using the same mathematics he'd used for 9 years on pipe assessments, as approximately the volume of a full utility truck per minute. They didn't know what would happen. That was the core of it. They had no intelligence on the Veil device's engineering. They had no certainty that introducing high-pressure water into the intake ports would accomplish anything at all. The theory, Ray's theory, assembled from 45 minutes of observation and a career's worth of mechanical intuition, was that the devices operated on a thermal processing principle that was efficient within a specific narrow range of inputs, and that supersaturating that input would cause the system to fail in the same way that any thermal management system fails when it receives more than it was designed to handle. It was, as Ray had said, a dumb solution. The 5 of them looked at each other across the lot, in the 103-degree heat of the 9th day. "Water workers," Ray said, and shrugged and opened the valve. The sound it made when the water hit the intake ports was not the explosion they'd half expected. It was a low grinding sound, a protest, a machine complaint that built over 30 seconds from a vibration into a full-throated mechanical argument between competing systems. The device got hotter. It got considerably hotter, the heat radiating off it in waves that made the air above it shimmer like desert asphalt. Then, with a sound like a very large breath being released, it went silent. Not just quiet, silent. The subaudible hum that Marcus had been feeling in his chest for 9 days stopped, and the absence of it was so complete that for a moment he thought something was wrong with his own body. He put his hand against his sternum. "Nothing." "Well," Ray said. Marcus looked at the sky. The Veil ships were still there, visible on the clearest days as dark elongated shapes, and they were still there now. But the device in the lot behind the warehouse was not humming. He picked up his phone and called Dana. "We did something," he said. "I don't know if it's enough, but we did something." They spread the information the way all useful information spreads, imperfectly, fast, and through every channel available, the informal network of utility workers and first responders and neighborhood coordinators, and anyone else who had spent their careers knowing where the infrastructure was and how it worked. In 24 hours, there were reports of 8 other devices being disabled using variations of the same method. In 48 hours, 14. The methods varied. Some used utility truck pressure systems. Some used fire department equipment. One team in what had been an industrial district had accessed a water tower and used gravity and volume rather than mechanical pressure. But the principle was consistent. Water versus heat. It was not a total victory. The Veil ships remained in orbit. The water supply infrastructure was still disabled. The heat was still there, diminishing gradually in areas where devices had been taken offline but still significant, still dangerous. There was no announcement from the Veil. No response, no retreat, no statement. They simply sat in orbit and, as far as anyone could tell, watched. Marcus thought about that, the watching, the assessment, as the original broadcast had called it. He thought about what an assessment might find. It might find a species that folded under systematic pressure, that succumbed to resource manipulation, that fell into hoarding and hierarchy and the documentation of deficits while children went without water. Or it might find something else. It might find the specific dumb, stubborn, unglamorous something else that happened when the people who knew how the pipes worked figured out that a pipe is a pipe is a pipe, and water is water, and the most powerful force in any system is the one that knows where everything connects. Day 12, the heat still significant but dropping. A light rain had started the previous evening, the first in 2 weeks, and it was still falling in the morning, thin and persistent, the kind of rain that doesn't make promises but keeps showing up. Cora had been awake since before dawn, and Marcus had found her sitting at the kitchen table in the gray pre-light with her sunflower dress and her recovered sneaker, which she had located beneath the basement stairs, and which still did not fit. "It's raining," she said. "Yeah," Marcus said. Nadia said rain makes things go back to normal. She said that. A while ago, when it first started being bad, she said just wait for the rain. Cora turned the sneaker over in her hands. "Is that true?" Marcus sat down across from her. Outside the kitchen window, the rain fell on the yard and on the city, on the streets that were still without pressure, on the infrastructure that was still dark, on the work that was still ahead of them. "Some things," he said. "Not all of it, but some things." "Which things?" He thought about that carefully, because she deserved a careful answer. "The things that were almost okay anyway," he said. "The things that just needed a little help getting back to where they were going." Cora thought about this. She set the sneaker on the table. "Like plants," she said. "Like plants. They were always going to grow. They just needed the water." "Yeah," Marcus said. "Exactly like that." Nadia appeared in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, still half asleep, her hair out of its pigtails. She looked at Marcus and Cora at the table, and at the rain through the window, and she didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "Is it over?" "Part of it," Marcus said. "Which part?" "The part where we didn't know what to do." He looked at her. "We know what to do now." Nadia came to the table and sat down. She did not say anything further, but she did not leave either, and the three of them sat in the early morning with the rain coming down outside, and the radio low on the counter cycling through updates that were still incomplete and still uncertain, but which had, in the past 24 hours, gained a quality they had lacked before. Not victory, something smaller and more durable. The particular human quality of having been handed an impossible situation, and having found, at the bottom of it, the specific dumb, stubborn thing that was specifically theirs to find. Dana found him later that morning in the yard, standing in the rain without an umbrella, which she observed and did not comment on. "What happens now?" she said from the back door. "I don't know." He turned around. "The ships are still there, the water's still off, there's a lot of work." "I know that, that's not what I meant." He looked at her. She had a way of asking the actual question without announcing that she was doing it, just putting it out there in the open between them and waiting to see if he was ready to look at it. "I think I'm staying here for a while," he said. "This house. These kids, whatever that means. Their mother. I've been in contact with the county. It's complicated. She needed help of a kind I couldn't give her." He paused. "She's in a program. She called Nadia last night. First call in 3 weeks. Dana nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "Nadia trusts you," she said. "It was an observation, not a verdict." "I think she trusts that I show up," Marcus said, "which is different, but it's a start." Dana looked at him in the way she had sometimes looked at him when they were at their best, which was the way you look at someone when you have cataloged their failures comprehensively and have arrived, through all of that cataloging, at something that is stubbornly unwilling to be finished. "You should call Eli when you come in," she said. "He wants to show you something he and Cora built in the basement." "What did they build?" "I don't fully understand it. It involves the bottle caps and I think also some string." She turned to go inside. "Come in soon. You'll catch cold." "In this heat." "The heat's breaking," she said. "You didn't notice." He stood in the yard and paid attention and found that she was right. The temperature was dropping, not fast, not completely, but measurably. 2 degrees, maybe 3. The rain was cool against his face. Above the clouds, somewhere in the upper atmosphere, the Veil ships were still there, silent, assessing. He didn't know what they were finding. He hoped it was something worth writing down. He went inside. He called Eli. He looked at the thing his son and Cora had built in the basement, which did indeed involve bottle caps and string and also apparently an overturned bucket and 2 pieces of cardboard, and which Cora explained was a water collection system, and Eli explained was actually a racing track, and which was evidently both, simultaneously, depending on what you needed it to be. "Does it work?" Marcus said. "We haven't tested it yet," Eli said. "We need rain." "There's rain outside." Eli and Cora looked at each other. "We need indoor rain," Cora clarified. Marcus thought about this. He went to the basement shelf where they kept the emergency supplies, and he found a spray bottle, the kind for misting plants, still half full of water. He brought it back and held it out. Eli's face did the thing that Marcus loved most about it. The brightness that had stopped trying to stay controlled and was just bright, uncomplicated and unguarded. The face of someone who has been handed exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. "Yeah," Eli said and took it. The water collected in the bottle caps. The rain fell outside. Somewhere above the clouds, something watched. And in the house on Delancey Street, in the basement, in the company of people who had found each other through the specific logic of emergency and need, and the stubbornness of quiet, honest work, the small bottle cap river ran. It was enough. It was for now enough.